war in the past has always had this emergent benefit that when a country, when an abstract power-based hierarchy becomes too powerful, there's a revolution either internally if it's too oppressive, or invasion from the outside if it's weak relative to how much resources it has, how much benefit there is to invade it. But one of Lowery's points is that we've now reached the point of kinetic stalemate where there cannot be a large-scale war like there was in the past to break down and discipline these abstract power-based hierarchies. In the past, they were broken down and disciplined. We've moved from god kings to monarchies to constitutional republics because of the threat of the people being governed when they're too oppressive. But now we've reached the point where nation states have nuclear arms. And so it's mutually assured destruction if there's an attempt to have a war between them directly, even though war does have these emergent benefits of, again, disciplining and breaking down these abstract power-based hierarchies. And so part of the beauty, again, of Lowery's thesis and of Bitcoin in general is it's going to allow us to have a form of quote-unquote war, whatever it is, an energy competition among rival nations that goes past the kinetic stalemate that we're left at. And so hopefully can bring some discipline to the abstract power-based hierarchies we operate within, to our own financial system, to the, again, software-based transnational corporations that restrict our speech and control our data. If we have, and you mentioned moving on to this, that electro cyber dome over our computers that is Bitcoin, we do have that way to protect ourselves. And even though we've scaled kinetic conflict beyond usefulness.
Yeah, so that's a great segue into the cybersecurity aspects of this. Like, what does it mean? I guess we could say, how does Bitcoin's proof of work mechanism allow for it to serve as an electro cyber security instrument? Obviously, we talk about Bitcoin as money a lot, and then you get into the nature and history of money, which is its own rabbit hole as explored on this show. But he's doing a reframe here. What is an electro cyber security instrument, and what is it about Bitcoin and proof of work that enable it to be one?
Yeah, a key point to remember about proof of work, and Lowery goes in this in depth in his thesis, is that was developed separately from Bitcoin as a security protocol.
Anti-spam.
Exactly, anti-spam. And that is still the function it's serving. Spam now, though, is a very broad concept of all of these denial service attacks, Sybil attacks, any sort of malicious control signal coming at your computer, trying to get at your data is spam in a sense because it's unwanted. And so this proof of work protocol that was developed to protect from spam, to protect us from spam, was incorporated into Bitcoin, is of course, fundamental to it. And now we see that Bitcoin has been sitting under the electro cyber dome of proof of work for 14 years. We have proof of concept that this electro cyber dome, and again, that's a metaphor, of course. You mentioned early on, Robert, that it's, we hesitate to call Bitcoin a weapon, and we hesitate to say that it's like offensive. I forget the word used, aggressive, something like that. But it is definitely a passive power projection technique in the form of a shield or a wall, in that it is a protective mechanism like a shell that an animal might evolve, or even that membrane that first, again, kind of captured resources for itself over a hydrothermal vent. Lowery has an image in his thesis of a computer, and then you have all these malicious control signals coming towards it. That's how we operate if we don't have proof of work. We are dependent upon abstract power-based hierarchies, software providers to protect us from all of these malicious control signals. That they're not going to be the malicious control signal. We have to assume that. And also that they're going to have appropriate security. We've self-domesticated. We've given all of our self-defense powers to software providers to protect our computers. We now have the Second Amendment in cyber form, the ability to defend our own digital resources by beginning with financial resources, with Bitcoin, putting them under this electro cyber dome. So that's one way to get it. There's many ways one can begin to talk about what it means to project physical power into cyberspace, what it doesn't mean to defend property that is virtual. And I do think Lowery's metaphor of the electro cyber dome is a good starting point in that way.
Yeah, I think too. I mean, tying to his other metaphor, which is on the cover of the book, right?
Right.
The antlers.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Like what are antlers? They're neither offensive nor defensive. They're somewhere in between. They're like this maneuver warfare implement because you would typically think, oh, they're offensive. They're using these antlers to attack something. But when you see that deer, or I guess any animal with antlers, they're actually resolving these alpha male disputes in a non-lethal way. So like it is offensive, but there's also a defense built into it so that they're not killing one another. So there's like, again, this middle ground somehow reached with the antlers metaphor. And that's why he's calling Bitcoin digital antlers, which is yet another metaphor in addition to the cyber dome you're describing. And what, the problem is, which is core to the Bitcoin ethos, is that we are trusting these technology companies. And what's the problem? I was like, well, when you trust them, they can censor you. You on social media, you're not the customer, you're the product, right? They're selling your attention to advertisers. They don't have any other revenue model, basically. So if you can own your own data and protect it with these antlers or with this electro cyber dome, well, then all of a sudden you can be censorship resistant online. You can not be exploited in the traditional social media model of just being the product, right? There's other ways to do social media now that are emerging. You could look into stuff like Nostr. It's not part of Bitcoin, but it's like enabled by Bitcoin. The reason Nostr is even being funded basically is by a bunch of Bitcoiners, and it's being developed by a bunch of Bitcoin developers. So it's kind of this echo of Bitcoin's success now giving rise to other decentralized protocols like Nostr and that whole universe. So yeah, that's all I was going to say about that. I don't know if you guys have anything to add there.
Yeah. So let me think about how to say this in a way that has continuity. When I learned about Bitcoin, I was a lender and I was financing farms and ranches, and it took me down the money rabbit hole because I had customers coming in with balance sheets showing highest crop yields ever, highest crop prices ever, highest government subsidies ever, and they all needed money. Mm-hmm. They were all going, these things do not add up. Mm-hmm. And core to understanding Bitcoin, even if you are looking at it from this side, I do believe is to understand the dollar, because you can't understand how Bitcoin is better than that thing unless you understand the trials and tribulations and failures. And so
you gotta understand the problem to understand the solution.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And so I jumped off and I decided that the thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to build a library and marketplace of best practices digitally. And I got 99% done with that. And then I read this and I halted because I realized that there was no way for me to secure your information if you use my app, his information, my information, in the traditional sense. Put it on Amazon Web Servers, put it on Azure, wherever. Those will always fail. And I likened it, I had the revelation when I was reading this, as Lowery talks about logic securing logic, and how that is an inevitable. It's not even a failure. It's that when someone finds the exploit, it is what it was intended to do. You don't put a door there unless you expect someone to go through it. Mm-hmm. I grew up on a farm and I spent all of my summers fixing fence because we learned, everybody knows this who's ever had cattle, you can have the biggest pasture in the world. You can have a 5,000 acre pasture, put 20 cows in there, and there's one hole in the fence and they find it. Mm-hmm. So that's what was my thought, was that if there is a hole, the cows will get out. And so building upon this, we, with Bitcoin, have the power to secure our financial information. And perhaps as we finish out the discussion, then we'll see that there is potential with Bitcoin to build higher layers upon that to protect personal information, to make it costly for a third party, not just to extract my information, where currently I just sign it away with the end user license agreement, right? You can do whatever you want with it. Here it is. Here's my information. And I heard a marketer for Amazon. This was 7 years ago, talking about they had 2 million data points on every single person, that separate data points where they can predict, and it's well known. Amazon knows before you do that you're pregnant, right? Based upon your habits. But if I'm able to not just protect you from extracting my information, then I'm also able to force you to pay for my attention. Do you want to send me an ad? Right. Okay, zap me some stats, right? Put your cost on the line in order to gain some benefit. And I don't think that anyone, the saying is that you're not bullish enough. And I don't relate that to price. I relate that to how it changes our culture, because I don't think people quite understand marketing is effectively it's a spam attack. It's a nearly zero cost way of firing lies at people and hoping that they bite on one. And if we make that costly, what does that do to our society? Do we then move towards things that are more sustainable with a lower time preference? And how does that reshape the world if we look at the current top of the S&P 500 and we see that those are all information companies? They're all information technology companies who have built up trillion-dollar assets based upon using us as the product and extracting that value. And when I look at the marvelous, magnificent 8 or the FANG or whatever it is, when I look at that, what I see is that's our value, and it's coming back to us, and it will come back to us. I'm very hopeful for that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. They're often called data monopolies, but they're really, especially in the social media domain, they are attention monopolies, right? Like they are monopolizing human attention, selling it to advertisers. And with that, they get all the preferences of those advertisers. They also, the pandemic, again, was a great example of this. You can just engineer consent. You can engineer psychology, basically, right? You can tell people it's safe and effective and all this other bullshit. And if it's paid for by the advertisers, well, then through repetition, you can just hypnotize people into believing things, right? So it's a tool for social engineering when it's coupled with a money printer. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.